Have you made the switch to Knix? Millions of women have made the switch to the revolutionary period underwear from Knix. That's Knix. Period panties from Knix are like no other, making them the #1 leak-proof underwear brand in North America. They're comfy, stylish, and absorbent, perfect for period protection from your lightest to your heaviest days. They look, feel, and machine wash just like regular underwear, but feature incognito protection that has you covered. You can shop sizes from extra small to 4XL. Choose from all kinds of colors, prints, and different styles, from bikinis to boy shorts, thongs to high-rise. You've got to try Knix. See why millions are ditching disposable, wasteful period products and have switched to Knix. Go to knix.com and get 15% off with promo code TRY15. That's knix.com, promo code TRY15 for 15% off life-changing period underwear. That's knix.com.
Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast in which we read and rank all 66 of Agatha Christie's novels. I'm Kemper Donovan.
I'm Catherine Broback.
And this week we are not reading a novel, we are reading a short story, The Adventure of the Cheap Flat. It was the third of Agatha Christie's short stories published in the Sketch magazine on May 9th, 1923. Well, let's get started.
Insofar as there is a victim in this story, and there kind of isn't, we only have Luigi Valdarno, who's a young Italian who works in some ambiguous capacity for a department within the American government where, for whatever reason, he has access to top secret naval plans which go missing. And then Valdarno is found 2 days later, shot to death in New York, and he's without the plans. But I mean, the real victim in this story, as the title, The Adventure of the Cheap Flat, might tell you, are bargain hunters everywhere. The cheap flat is always too good to be true.
Yeah, so you could say that the real victims in this story are Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, this couple who lucked into a ridiculously cheap flat in fashionable Knightsbridge. The name of the building is Montague Mansions. It's very well-to-do. They are basically bragging at a party to one Captain Hastings, among others, about what a great deal they've gotten on their place.
Ultimately, we have to look at Mr. and Mrs. Robinson as suspicious because they, got a really cheap flat. And then, as far as suspects go, outside of Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, we have a Miss Elsa Hart, who we do not meet, but we hear about, and she's a young DC concert singer who was involved with the deceased Luigi Valdarno and who disappeared at the same time of his death. And American government officials have quote-unquote reasons to believe that she might actually be an accomplished international spy now en route to England.
And then the only other suspects really are the vague notion of Italian secret societies, whether the Camorra or the Mafia, who are after this Elsa Hart for the missing naval papers. Valdarno, the one who was found dead, was likely affiliated with one of these secret societies, so perhaps they are trying to exact revenge for his murder. The reason why this story is so weird is that it's oddly structured in that the mystery is not apparent to anyone except for Poirot. He kind of ferrets out the fact that something untoward is going on when no one else is really aware of it.
Well,
right?
Yes, except they kind of all know that something untoward is going on, right? Because
they know that something weird is going on because this flat that's so nice is being rented for such a cheap amount. But he's the one that magically gets to the bottom of just how nefarious it is.
Right. So he's told the story by Captain Hastings, who is actually humble bragging, right? He's humble bragging to Poirot about how clever he was at solving why these dinner party acquaintances got this cheap flat.
Because it was even weirder than just the fact that they got a flat for a really cheap rate. There was a couple who went into the flat right before them, and when they came out, they said, "Oh, don't bother, because it's actually already been let. It's not available anymore." And they went in just because you never know, and they thought maybe they could pay their way to
taking the flat
if they had, pay a premium on the flat if it was really something that they wanted. They were basically being ruthless bargain hunters, as one has to be to get a decent flat, apparently in London of 1923, or perhaps
in
Los
New
Angeles
York,
of
San
2016.
Francisco, Los Angeles, 2016, yeah.
Yeah. When they go up to the flat, it is, of course, available, and they get it. And that's very, very odd. And someone at the party asks Captain Hastings to deduce why that would be the case, saying that, calling him an expert in the solving of such mysteries. And he says, well, obviously they just went up to the wrong flat, the previous couple.
That is what sets off Poirot when he hears a story, and then what sets off Poirot more is that
Because probably what sets off Poirot is that he realizes that there's no way Captain Hastings could have actually solved anything. So he's like, if everyone's thinking that you actually solved something, there must be more to this story, so I'm going to look into it.
And also Poirot apparently is like having a low caseload, and I guess is just bored. Yeah, sure. So he... The other thing that piques his interest then is when he does go poking around, he finds out that, in fact, the Robinsons have been letting the flat for the last 6 months.
Right. Well, he's told that the Robinsons have actually been in the flat for the last 6 months by a porter. And Hastings is shocked to hear that, because that must mean that the Robinsons lied to him at the party. And Poirot says, well, see, I told you that there was more to the story. So from there, they're sort of hooked, and both of them want to get to the bottom of what's really going on here. That was the world as it seems to be. We've got this odd situation with this flat and this couple in it. What's going on? And now we kind of make our way to what is happening through clues and deductions. Go ahead.
Of course, there's something wrong with the flat. The Robinsons actually propose at the dinner party that it might be haunted. And then everybody's like, well, no, probably not actually haunted, but like,
Supernatural is never the answer in Agatha Christie.
So it's not just that it's a cheap flat, it's like a real cheap flat. Cheap. So they're getting it for £80 per year, and Poirot, he asks about the actual rates in Montague Mansions, and the regular rate for a year for a flat is £350 instead of $80. So they're not getting a little discount on this flat. They are getting...
It works out generally, just staying in pounds. It works out to about little under £350 a month today in today's pound. And what it actually should cost is about £1,500 a month.
That would still be a bargain for a posh London apartment.
I know. Maybe this is a small flat. It better be a 1-bedroom. And the other thing we should have mentioned is that this flat has been available for a long time, at least according to the Robinsons. So it seems to be that for a while there were a lot of couples being turned away, and then for some reason the Robinsons were accepted. So there has to be something specific about them that got them the flat. Right.
They must possess some particular characteristic that qualified them far more than everybody else who had passed through. Poirot also finds out from the porter that people with the last name Robinson have been in the flat for 6 months, and although Poirot has never met Mrs. Robinson, he asked for a description from Hastings, and so when he addresses the porter, the description of Mrs. Robinson matches Hastings' description. So where Poirot goes from that, his deductive leap is that, if they're looking for a particular characteristic in a person, the characteristic was in fact resemblance to a different Mrs. Robinson.
Right. I suppose he could have deduced that the Robinsons were just lying.
That would have been, if you were going to do the Occam's razor, you would have thought that would be that would be that.
Yeah, that the Robinsons were just lying for some reason. But he at least just begins to suspect that there may be another set of Robinsons who had been in this flat for the previous 6 months and who essentially needed to replace themselves with new Robinsons who looked somewhat similar.
Right, which it's an interesting It's an interesting intuitive leap, but, it's Poirot, so what can we say?
And to be fair, if there weren't further clues and deductions that were supporting that, I'm sure he would move on and go on another path. But there is, in fact, a big supporting clue that he finds for that theory, which is that Elsa Hart, the potential spy and thief of those papers, fits the description of Stella Robinson. She has a similar appearance to the Mrs. Robinson that was described by the porter. And she, in fact, disappeared from the United States 6 months ago with her brother in the direction of England. So,
and, of course, the flat has been leased for the last 6 months. Right.
So things are kind of lining up where it seems like perhaps Elsa Hart has been posing as a Mrs. Robinson in this flat for 6 months with her husband, who is in fact her brother.
The oddest thing, though, is that if nobody's been in the flat and they've been looking, basically they're looking for a decoy couple, right? So that's the deduction. Right. And they just did it by generally making the flat really cheap and assuming that so many people were going to go through that eventually they would find somebody with the same last name that they had adopted and also who looked like them.
They certainly took their time about it, and why didn't they just pay some unwitting person to assume the name of Robinson, someone, look for someone with a certain appearance and then give them a certain amount of money to assume the name of Robinson, not knowing that they could potentially be putting themselves in harm's way. I would think that they could affect that plan within a week, not 6 months of trying to find someone.
I suppose that the danger in that would be that they would not have to go through a leasing agent, and so they would actually see Elsa Hart rather than sort of anonymously going on a house visit, right? I mean,
they could have hired a third party. I mean, it's just the point. It's a fair point that the time delay of their plan, I think, is a little problematic because
I think it's very problematic.
The whole point is that they're worried that this Italian mafia is after them and going to kill them at any moment, and a decoy plan that takes 6 months to enact is not really much of a decoy plan, but there we are. They finally found Robinsons who could take their place, and the poor unwitting Robinsons who have moved in have no idea that they are actually sitting ducks, so to speak, for
a hitman
to come and exact revenge for the death of of our murder victim, of Celdarno.
As a quick aside, our last Christie was the man in the brown suit, and I think it is a little bit funny that both of the crimes really hinge on people having an interesting relationship with house shopping. Leasing agents play like a secret back role in both works. Really a running theme here.
It's kind of like so few flats, so much time.
That's terrible. So the reckoning is a thing that happened.
And this is where, before we get there, it's like Poirot it's like he's identifying all these different pieces where you have
it's completely circumstantial evidence.
It's completely circumstantial, and the story itself is so much tell and so little show.
It's virtually no show up until the reckoning, in which case...
Up until the reckoning, exactly, which is why the reckoning itself is really more than just... the reckoning is pretty much the whole story, because he tells us what was going on with Elsa and this Italian man who was killed and how she stole the papers and came, and then he connects the dots with them hiring the Robinsons, and essentially the mystery is solved, and now all that has to happen is that Elsa and her brother/husband, we'll just call her the brother husband.
I like that.
They have to be brought to justice, and the Robinsons have to be protected. So they go through quite an elaborate series of activities to make this happen.
So Poirot...
Let's go through it.
Poirot lets a flat in Montague Mansions himself. I guess they're rolling in the private investigating income because...
I guess so, yeah.
So he rents it for a month. They have a coal lift.
Right.
So, like, not quite, like, somewhere, I guess, between a garbage chute and a dumbwaiter?
Yeah, that's what I thought, too. I think it's like a small sort of elevator space that stops on each floor, and it's where you
toss things
get
out
rid of the coal.
Yeah, I think so.
That you've used.
I think so.
Yeah.
And it has much like a dumbwaiter. It has like a rope and pulley system.
Right.
And so Poirot and Hastings decide to ride the coal lift so that they can go down to the coal lift of the Robinsons' flat. And, well, again, still in basically like a garbage chute, they dismantle the lock on the coal lift to the Robinsons' flat so that it can open from inside the coal lift, and thus they can later, at a convenient time for them, break into the Robinsons' apartment.
And in the story, in the original version, they wait to break in at some moment when the Robinsons aren't there.
Correct. Yes.
So the opportune time is when the Robinsons are gone. They go into, essentially this garbage chute, ride the coal lift, get to the Robinsons, get in through the jimmied lock. Poirot has given Hastings his revolver, and then they wait for the intruder, who Poirot knows is on his way, to assassinate the Robinsons. And when he comes in, they...
While he very elaborately drills out the lock of the front door, which also leads me to believe, who else is in the hallway? Wouldn't, neighbors possibly see a guy, dismantling a front door lock? But, yeah, apparently not. He comes in to the flat.
And, of course, Hastings has no idea who he is, so Hastings is narrating the story, as always, and he is very surprised when Poirot, rather than attacking and then subduing him and hauling him into the police, whispers to him and gets into a car with him and Hastings to go to St. John's Wood.
All Hastings knows is that he has to put the barrel of his revolver in the gentleman's back to basically force him to this car.
So they go to this other house. Also, Hastings has no idea what house this is. We have no idea. Poirot lures a man who answers the door, who's in his bathrobe, out of the house. He then pushes inside of the house with the intruder and Hastings, closes the door, locks the man outside, and now they're inside the house with a woman who turns out to be Elsa Hart.
Right, and everybody's in a bathrobe. And unfortunately, at some point in the transit, the captive has gotten a hold of Captain Hastings' revolver. So now he's hiding behind a curtain, and when Poirot makes the reveal to the woman who is Elsa Hart, the man who emerges is a very stereotypical broken English-speaking Italian gentleman brandishing Captain Hastings' revolver and threatening to shoot Elsa Hart.
Right, because this is our Italian who is enacting revenge for Elsa Hart having betrayed our original murder victim, Luigi Valdarno, and he tries to shoot Elsa, but he is unsuccessful.
Because Poirot has removed the bullets from the revolver. So, in other words, Captain Hastings was also brandishing a revolver this entire time that was sans
that had no bullets. And, of course, he had no idea. And Elsa Hart and her brother-husband, who was the man who had opened the door and been thrown outside, are delivered into the waiting hands of Inspector Japp and also Mr. Burt of the United States Secret Service.
Turns out that Elsa Hart just very casually hands over the secret naval plans to Poirot, and they're sewn inside a black cat cozy, like a cover for a telephone.
The plans themselves are so vaguely alluded to and so extraneous to the story. I mean, they really are a prototypical MacGuffin. It's just very clear that they don't have any specific purpose to the story. They're just the thing that we need to have a mystery surrounding, and it's a bit anticlimactic when we find them, because that's it. Okay, great.
It's true, and I mean, I think that goes into a broader point. You know, we've talked about Secret Adversary and The Man in the Brown Suit, like the sort of thriller Christie's. But in general, anything involving, Marple or Poirot are puzzle mysteries. And even the short stories are essentially set up or present as puzzle mysteries. And in this one, things like the MacGuffin really kind of violate the rules, I think, of the puzzle mystery. I mean, it's extraneous to a very large degree. The actual mystery here is, why is there a cheap flat? That is what the mystery is.
Right.
It's not.
It's true. I mean, this really, it's more, you could argue it's a short story thriller.
I don't disagree with that at all. It's just an odd choice when you're comparing it to Poirot short stories, because it just really misses the mark, I think, on a bunch of points. I mean, I think the off-screening, quote unquote, of most of the plot, I found off-putting. It's a lot.
Yeah, like we said, it's all tell. Yeah. It's hardly any show. And the show is kind of ridiculous, too, which we can talk about, in that Poirot and Hastings go to these insane lengths to lure this Italian man, this Italian gangster into the Robinsons' apartment. The whole riding the coal lift thing and
fiddling with the locks and
fiddling with the fact that
they let an entire flat for a month for this. I mean,
right? Yeah, it's not very. Poirot is usually his methods are simple and elegant.
I agree, and this is not.
This is so far from that.
And
it feels like an early story.
It does, but I mean, we've been through some of the other short stories, they're all written at about the same time, right? And I mean,
oh, absolutely.
And so I found it a little disconcerting, even, especially how the spy plot is presented, where basically Poirot says to Hastings, almost literally, he says, "I know you like your movies so much, let me tell you a story." And then he just narrates over the course of 2 or 3 paragraphs that he just happened to be chatting with Inspector Japp, and Inspector Japp tells him this detailed American scandal about a woman who is, of course, Elsa Hart.
Involving Elsa Hart and
So he's told the entire story by Inspector Japp, and then he recounts that. So now it's a third-hand story to Captain Hastings.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing of it is Poirot has never met Stella Robinson, the woman from the dinner party. And at that point in the story, he presumably has never seen or even seen a picture of Elsa Hart. And so he's making these assumptions based on, virtually nothing.
It's a weak deduction, for sure. The clunkiness of, let me tell you a story, reminded me of when we were going through The Murder on the Links. And there's that whole chapter where Poirot says, this case reminds me of that case from a long time ago. Let me tell you about that case.
Right.
And then we're just spoon-fed that case. And we can talk a little bit about the televised adaptation of this.
They do a much better job.
Series, because they do a much better job, and an even better job than in the Murder on the Links adaptation. We had that newsreel, which was still, you could argue, slightly clunky, but at least a little bit more interesting than in the original novel. But here, the episode, and we should just specify that this was episode 7 of the second season, and it aired in early 1990, 18th of February on 1990. And the episode opens up on Inspector Japp, Captain Hastings, and Poirot all watching a movie together.
Yeah.
And
it's charming.
I mean, they're watching...
It's a
really
gangster
charming.
film.
It's a gangster film. They specifically mentioned the film. It's a James Cagney film called G-Men, which came out in 1935, in keeping with the setting of all of these episodes, all around the same years in the mid-30s. And it's just they're out for a night at the movies, at a movie palace, which I think is really adorable. And Japp and Hastings are totally into it. Poirot is in hell. He hates it. He actually closes his eyes by the end of it. And then they have this very organic conversation coming out of it where Poirot critiques American crime fiction. He says the reason why he didn't like the movie is that he doesn't care for the type of detective who shoots first and asks questions later. And then Hastings says that the FBI, who had been featured in the film, they're the best. And Japp sort of gives him a look, and Hastings realized that he insulted him and tries to take it back. And then Japp says, well, actually, I'm going to be working with the FBI soon on a case. And then in that way, he brings up this case, which is brought up much less organically and more clunkily and much later also in the story. So we're getting a lot of the backstory out in a seamless, organic, and early way already in the episode. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of those episodes that builds on the short story and just takes it further and makes it better.
Once again, we come to the problem of having Captain Hastings narrate them in the short stories because, there are certain limitations in that, and it's much easier here when also Inspector Japp is such a bigger character in the adaptations. And, it's funny, we're not doing the adaptations in chronological order, but in the first few seasons of the show, he and Miss Lemon are significant members of the cast in all of them, and where they're not, I mean, Miss Lemon doesn't even appear in these, but Inspector Japp is either mentioned second-handedly, or he shows up at the end, or he shows up in sort of a weird capacity, versus being Philip Jackson, much more fleshed out character in the series. And so I think that having him as an entry point and having him explain it and having Kate Hastings be involved with that initial explanation is so much a better launching point for the story.
And of course, these episodes are always better for having Miss Lemon in them because Pauline Moran is amazing. There's this great scene.
Her eyebrows,
the curls on the sides of her face. Everything about her face is just so expressive. She doesn't have that many lines, but she has such a presence whenever she's in a scene.
Well, she has great reaction shots.
Yeah.
Great reaction shots.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she has a really good role. And she has a really good role in this episode.
She does. Well, there's this great scene where Poirot sends her to a nightclub where Elsa Hart is hiding out as a lounge singer. She pretends to be writing for a women's magazine. She makes her way in, and the nightclub owner is really gross and hitting on her and just disgusting. And
Can I also point out, not to interrupt, but I also point out that the last Poirot, I guess we did that as a novel, like Murder of the Lynx. We also have the adaptation nightclub singer element. And I think it's really interesting that somebody who is trying to be like on the lam, but in both cases they chose to make her a nightclub singer, which seems to be like a really obvious choice if you're trying to be undercover. Like, why would you be in public?
Well, although she is identified in the story as being a singer of some sort, isn't she?
A concert singer, quote unquote. But it doesn't say that she's doing it in London. That's what she was doing in DC.
Right. Yeah, no, I actually had that thought too, that they really, and I think they do it because when you're trying to evoke the 30s, nothing is easier than those, these sort of
lounge singers,
sultry lounge singer scenes, which they do very well, and there are a bunch of them in this episode. Yeah, I mean, Miss Lemon's outfit, I thought she looked like Carmen Sandiego, but even better. She was
nothing
fantastic.
Wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Also, I just like that she's like a reporter for like a ladies magazine.
Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like she would be a really good reporter for a ladies magazine. Like, I kind of feel like Pauline Moran manages to convey not only a flawless sense of humor, but also effortless competence. I just get the sense that Miss Lemon is good at anything she wants to do. Like, if Miss Lemon wanted to be a detective, she might be a better detective than Poirot. Even though he doesn't realize it, we realize it. I just love the way that she brings that character to life.
As a kid, she was my favorite part of the show. I just adored Miss Lemon so much. And I think the really funny thing is that even though Hastings is so much more competent in the adaptation than he is in the stories, Miss Lemon, every time she's given like something to do, she's just so much better at it than Captain Hastings.
Yeah, it's really true. One other thing I appreciated about the episode was that, again, we talked about how all the telling and in the original story was clunky and got a little tiresome. And in the episode, when Poirot has to tell the gangster backstory of what happened with Elsa Hart and this Italian man who she double-crossed and killed, we get, of course, the backstory visualized, and they tell it as if it's part of the movie that we saw at the beginning of the episode. Like when she shoots him, the sound of the gunshots are extremely canned, just like the sound of the gunshots in the movie itself. And the way the lines that they're saying to each other and the way that the actors are reading the lines is arch, and it's not as grounded as the lines in the rest of the episode.
This is it, baby. Take it nice and slow.
Luigi, you made it all too easy.
Carla, no.
Goodbye, lover boy.
And it's just, again, another way that
Right.
the episode is just having fun with the telling of the story in a way that just enhances the original version. I appreciate all those tonal tweaks that they make.
I definitely appreciate it. It's a very entertaining episode, I think. For a story that I had some problems with.
All the problems with the story they're all still there in the episode because they don't really fundamentally change anything about it, but they fill it with these interesting tonal irregularities and humorous tangents and interesting character moments, stuff like that. So you're just diverted the entire time, and you're not as focused on the weirdness of the story.
Right, and I mean, again, I think we have to mention this every time, and maybe it's redundant, but I feel like it's not because I feel like it has to be mentioned. It's that the chemistry between the main cast, between Polly Moran and David Suchet and Hugh Fraser and Philip Jackson, is so palpable. Yeah. Like, they play off of one another so well that at some level you're not going to pick it apart because they just sell it. They sell it on an emotional level that doesn't exist in the story.
Yeah, and to give the writers their credit too, there's this one moment that I really appreciated because I'm now so attuned to the differences between the Poirot Hastings relationship in the episodes versus the original stories. And there's this one great moment where Poirot is fiddling with the lock. The Robinsons are actually there when that happens, so Hastings has to distract them with idle chatter, which he's kind of good at, although he starts asking about different kinds of brushes for combing woodwork. It's like it barely makes any sense what he's saying, and the Robinsons have this. And by the way, Mrs. Robinson is played by Samantha Bond, who a lot of people know as
Moneypenny,
and in Downton Abbey as well. They're just like, what is happening? And then you cut to Poirot, and he drops some of his tools, and Hastings has to keep the Robinsons from investigating right away, and he says he'll go do it. And Poirot just gets away in the nick of time, and in the next scene they're walking away, and Poirot acknowledges, like, wow, thanks for saving me in there.
What on earth was that?
It came from the kitchen. No, I didn't hear anything.
I'd better take a look.
Well, allow me. Detective's prerogative. You never know. Might be one of the ghosts. Wind blew it open, I expect. I should keep this bolted if I were you. You never know who's about.
I don't know what the Robinsons would have said if they'd seen the foot of Hercule Poirot disappearing into the twilight of the back stairwell.
I am indebted to your quick thinking, mon ami.
And the Poirot of the stories just would never make that mistake. He's too expert to ever drop anything. He's too perfect. And it's just really nice that it's a genuine moment between them when Poirot says, yeah, you really did help me. And he's not in any way belittling Hastings. I love those little moments.
I do too. And Hastings in the story would also never be able to improvise that well.
Right.
The only other thing that I wanted to mention about Hastings, it doesn't really apply to the adaptation, but it was something I noticed at the very beginning of the story, is that he basically says that he is chronicling Poirot's cases. It says, so far in the cases which I have recorded, that's the first line. And then he says, in the events I am now about to chronicle, a remarkable chain of circumstances, which is a very Watson-y thing.
Well, and by the way, Watson is, once again, I mean, it's a slight Holmes reference where when he's bantering at the party, Hastings says, obvious, my dear Watson. But Holmes still does get glancingly referenced a lot in these stories and the novels, I've noticed. And that's just more of it's Sherlock Holmes, and obviously it's just a reference people are going to get. It's not that important, but it's just interesting that it does keep on happening.
No, but I did think it was interesting that we hadn't seen this in a while. The idea that, for whatever reason, Hastings is chronicling Poirot's cases, which, at no point does that seem to come to anything. And where is he chronicling them? I think is an interesting question. But I thought it was curious that was the first line in this one.
Yeah. That's true. The one other thing I did want to bring up, I did also like how in the episode there is a sort of prevailing theme throughout of American crime fiction versus British detective fiction, and that American crime fiction is shoot first, ask questions later, as Poirot says in the beginning. And Poirot's methods, even though he is running up and down coal lifts or staircases, by the end the FBI guy still wants to use guns, and he makes a comment like marveling at how Poirot was able to do that without even a shot. No one actually gets shot. He removes the bullets from the gun, and Poirot was kind of proud of that. And it was more of a consistent theme in the episode than it was in the story, even though it's absolutely there in the story. But I appreciated that they made that a consistent theme.
I completely agree, and I think the line is actually good. The Italian is trying to shoot the gun, and in the story, Poirot says, "Never will you trust your old friend, Hastings. I do not care for my friends to carry loaded pistols about with them, and never would I permit a mere acquaintance to do so. No, mon ami." I do like that. I like the fact that he is appalled by the level of violence.
Right. It was refreshing. Well, I think that's it for this short story. Next week, we are going to be tackling The Secret of Chimneys.
I guess we're going to find out a lot about flue cleanliness and chimney sweeping. There's
a special Santa chapter where Santa, is maybe that famous monologue of Phoebe Cates's in Gremlins.
Oh, definitely. We could definitely do that. And also, the Darwin Awards people for people who try to break into houses through chimneys. Yep. Maybe we'll get some of that. Yep. It could be a very exciting
very, very exciting. Can't wait.
You will not want to miss that one. So hopefully we will see you all next week. And in the interim, please look us up on Twitter at allaboutthedame. The same on Instagram, and email us at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. And most importantly, please give feedback on whatever you are listening to this on, whether it is SoundCloud or Stitcher or iTunes. We very much appreciate any and all feedback.
Thank you. Bye. See you next week.
Bye. See you next week.